Greetings, my friends. It is such a pleasure to be back in touch with you. I'm always happy to try to share knowledge of Bristol, historical knowledge with you. People have told me time and again, we want to get your head empty. Well, I don't know whether that's going to be possible or not. I'm trying to write everything on paper that I can, but I'm sure that many things will be left out. But that's neither here nor there. For this time, we will just open up and share with you some of our knowledge of this historic old city here on the state line. Any town of any size, especially when it's developing, needs good hotels for prospective buyers of lots and so on, and for the place to stay. Of course, Bristol, founded 1852, no development to 1853, soon saw the need of a hotel. Now, at first, Joseph Ray Anderson, the founder of Bristol, Virginia, Tennessee, opened up his home to keep people. He had passed out many brochures advertising the new town. Lots for sale, about $125 each. Boy, I'd like to have about a dozen of them now. But he advertised that all up and down the railroad between here and Lynchburg. And of course, a lot of people were coming in from that area and all over wanting to buy lots. At first, he opened up a bedroom upstairs in his home for a place in which to keep them. The room wasn't too large, but it had 4 beds in it. And a man who stayed there said you could almost step from one bed to the other. They were so close in that room. Then Dr. Hammer, I believe that was John P. Hammer, had leased the old King home, which actually wasn't in Bristol. It was up on this hill and was outside the city limits, of course. He opened up his home for renters. But Mr. Anderson, so desperately wanting to develop his town, soon saw that that wasn't going to be sufficient to care for people who came to needing a place to stay. He had sold a lot, 2 lots actually, lots 6 and 7, in the old plan of Bristol, to a man named Alfred T. Wilson. He was from Mountain City, Tennessee, but he'd heard of Bristol, he'd heard of the development, he wanted to get in on the ground floor. And so he bought lots 6 and 7, ideally located. Right now you can pinpoint those lots because they form the parking lot in front of the First Baptist Church, which is located on the corner of Virginia and East State. So those lots that are now vacant and used for parking by that church are the old lots of 6 and 7. And it was on that section of land, 2 lots, that he built a grocery store. But Anderson began to talk to him and tell him that he believed it would be good to have a real hotel in this town. So he persuaded him to build a hotel on the western side of his building. Kind of strange setup. The hallway ran along the building wall of the old grocery store. All the rooms had to be on one side of a hall, upstairs and down. Not only did he make rooms for visitors, but he also set up a kitchen and dining area for people who would be staying with him. We have the recollections of a girl who stayed there with her parents for 2 or 3 days in 1855. She told what kind of food they had, mostly beans and potatoes with a little boiled meat once in a while. And at one point she said a man came in from the country with a gallon of buttermilk, and they certainly did enjoy that. She also spoke of how noisy the hotel was because people were coming in at all hours of the night, arriving in town, and they would make noise as they went up and down the halls. The lot, which would become the site of the first hotel in Bristol, sold for the 2 for $125. He gave him a special bargain with the understanding that he would build upon it a hotel. Now, This old Pleasant Hill where I live is loaded with old-time papers. There are numerous, there's old trunks, there's dresser drawers, there's everything around here filled with old papers. It was home of an old lawyer, you know. And on rainy days, sometimes I go into those drawers and into that old trunk or two and try to see what I can find. Behold, I found the deed to that first hotel lot, stacked away. Valuable in 2 or 3 ways, not much monetary value. Those things don't bring too much. I've seen deeds of 1806 and 7 sell for $7, $8. But I value this because it has the founder of the city's name, his signature on it. And it also has his wife's signature. You see, the wife had to sign the deed also. And she had to sign it in another room from where her husband was. In this case, Cornelius Carmack was the justice of the peace who made the deed, and he had to take her in a room apart and ask her if she was really signing that of her own free will, or did her husband have her under threat to sign the deed. And he made a certificate that she signed it of her own free will. That old deed, I put it in a frame just because I valued it so highly, and it is now with me permanently, I guess. So you're seeing a historic object now, the deed for the land upon which the first hotel in Bristol stood. The hotel was called the Columbia. I don't know how he got the name. I guess he thought it sounded pretty good, so he called it the Columbia. Now I have no idea why, but there were a lot of things named in Bristol that I have no idea why they got the name. There's a few streets here that I've never been able to figure out how they got the name. The Columbia opened in 1855, early 1855. It was a big hotel when, doing a big business when this lady came here in springtime of 1855, April, that's all we know, April of 1855. And it was already going then. Now the next hotel in Bristol, I don't have any papers pertaining to it, but it's built down just across from the depot on what's now Martin Luther King Boulevard. At that time it was 4th Street and ran all the way through Tennessee and Virginia. Later it became Front Street, and what a notorious area it was. It was when I came here. You didn't walk through there unless you're a little bit brave. But anyway, the next hotel was built on that street, and it was called the Virginia House. Well, during the big celebration of the coming of the railroad in 1856, a corner of that hotel fell off. It had been hastily built out of inferior brick and mortar, and it just collapsed while I was having the big shindig of celebrating the coming of the train to Bristol. Then they rebuilt it and called it the Magnolia. And then it was rebuilt again. It burned in 1860, and they rebuilt it again and called it the Langhorne Tavern, built by a family named Langhorne. And then back to the Virginia House. And strangely, the finest hotel in town was right in the middle of one of the roughest parts of town. I arrived in this city at 4 p.m. on August the 20th, 1953. I was a total stranger. I knew not one person in the town. Not one person knew me. I was coming here to make a new life for myself, to settle. Not permanently, I didn't think, but at least for the time being, I was going to be here for at least 9 months. I just left the hills of Kentucky, where I'd been living for a year, and I had very little money. Best I can remember, about $35. Now that's a little sum to try to get a start in a new city on, but I believed I could, and I was willing to take the chance. But you know, when you arrive in a town as a stranger, you can't go to somebody's house and say, I want to stay all night with you. You have to find a place of public lodging. Shall we use a nautical term and say I disembarked at the bus station on Piedmont. Building still stands. I think it's on the corner of Winston Avenue, or Winston Alley and Piedmont. But the nearest hotel I could see was the Hotel Bristol, standing 5 stories high, facing Moore Street on the corner of Cumberland. Well, I put what suitcases I had, 2 I think, in lockers. You could put it in the quarter and lock up your baggage in the bus station. And I started out walking without anything across town to see if I could find a place to stay. Well, the Hotel Bristol looked pretty grand, and I figured it would be expensive. So when you're trying to get settled on $35 in a new town, you have to watch every penny. Well, I passed it by. You know, folks, I later learned that I could have gotten a room in that hotel for the same price that I did in what I consider to be a cheap hotel. They had rooms for about the same price. This is going to floor you, but in those days, pretty much a going price for a hotel room was about $1.50. You could get a room for that. Now, if you got one with bath, it'd probably be $2, or maybe even $2.50. Oh, I have rented many a hotel room for $1.50, and some of them very good. Clean at least. They didn't have, and nearly all of those that did not have bath would have a sink in the room where you could get water, and also where you could wash up just a little bit in your own room. Well, I started on up Cumberland, and way up Cumberland I could see the Hotel General Shelby. Now it did look classy. 8 stories tall, right across from the depot, and strangely, the finest hotel in town was right in the middle of one of the roughest parts of town, surrounded by 2 or 3 cheaper hotels and all kinds of joints and so on. It's just a rough country. But it's so near the depot. That's what was its salvation. It was right near the depot, just across from the depot door. Well, I marked that off the list because that's a big fancy hotel. It's going to be too expensive. I later found I could have gotten a room in it for maybe just 50 cents more than what I paid. Right directly behind it was a hotel called the Virginia Annex. Well, it looked like about my kind of hotel. I stopped in there. I got my room for $1.50. It's a clean room, and had a window overlooking part of the town. I could see the old courthouse, the old Virginia courthouse from it, and the Confederate statue in front of it. There I spent my first night in Bristol. I left Kentucky hungry, and I got to Bristol hungry, and my supper that night consisted of a payday candy bar and a glass of tap water. You know, I've learned since the Bristolians are so kind and pleasant and hospitable. If people had known that, I could have been invited into many homes in Bristol, but I didn't know how hospitable they were at the time, but they're that way. I wouldn't do it. I'm too proud. I'd starve to death on the street before I would ask for food. I think I would do that even yet. But that was home, and I didn't sleep well that night because I was concerned about what was going to happen on tomorrow. I was just going to start trying to carve out a way to live in a new town. There was lots of activity in the hotel. I could hear walking through the halls all hours of the night, real quiet knocks on doors. Perhaps I've told you enough that you will deduct the truth or come to the truth. It was more than a hotel, but I didn't know that at the time. Well, I went in innocent and came out innocent, but I did later learn that. In fact, I met a man the next day. He found out my purpose was going to school here, and he was horrified, and he sent me immediately to the YMCA. The building still stands. It's up on the corner of Shelby and Fifth. It's now an exclusive office building. But that was my first home in Bristol. I went up there and got me a room for a week for $3. A real nice clean room for $3. I later learned that I could have gotten rooms all over town for that in private homes. Bristol was different in those days. We had 5 hotels in town, and all of them on the Virginia side. Now, there was one in Tennessee that called itself a hotel, but it was really a boarding house, just a rooming house with a glorified name. Later, they changed it because they found out Tennessee had stringent regulations on hotels, and so they just changed it to rooming house. But at that time, and that's one difference in Bristol then and now, there were rooms and private homes all over the place. These old streets, Moore, Lee, Taylor, Pennsylvania, Alabama, any old street here that had big old 2-story houses, nearly all, you could just about rent a room in any house around here. Anywhere from $3 to $5 a week, maybe a real nice room for $5. It was long advertised as the only fireproof hotel in Bristol, and I stood across the street and watched that only hotel fireproof in town. I watched it burn. Well, the Bristol Hotel burned, 1973. It was long advertised as the only fireproof hotel in Bristol, and I stood across the street and watched that only hotel fireproof in town. I watched it burn. The General Shelby was knocked down during the urban renewal, destroyed, demolished. At this time, we don't have a single hotel downtown. The Executive Plaza building was built as a hotel, and there's been an effort to try to get a hotel back in it. It never served as a hotel. It served as an office building, but it was started for a hotel. The Bristol, Virginia Post Office was in it one time. So folks, that was how I found rooming home away from home when I came to Bristol. I'm glad to say that now I have a comfortable home and very well furnished. I'm humbly grateful for it, but there was a time when I had to scratch to find a room. I hope this has been of some value to you, and I'll give you my usual benediction and go away, but I'll be back later again someday on this show with something else to tell you. Until then, may the best in life be yours.